The sound of my daughter's breathing over a telephone line has always been a language I could translate without a dictionary. A frantic code of sighs and stammers that tells me exactly how much of herself she is currently erasing to keep the peace. It is a Tuesday. The rain in Seattle doesn't fall so much as it suspends itself in the air, a gray, claustrophobic gauze that clings to the windows of my craft room. I am 56 years old, and my joints have begun to ache in a way that feels like a physical manifestation of all the things I've left unsaid over the decades. They call me intense. Nora, the woman who feels too much. Nora, whose love is a weighted blanket that sometimes threatens to suffocate. I was sitting at my workbench, the scent of cedar shavings and linseed oil sharp in my nostrils, when the phone buzzed. "Mom?" Emma's voice was a thin wire, brittle. If I touched it, it would snap and cut us both. "I'm here, Em," I said, my thumb tracing the grain of the wood I was sanding. I didn't say, "Are you okay?" I knew better. To ask a woman in an invisible cage if she is okay is to force her to lie, and I would not be the reason my daughter had to betray her own reality today. "We had a disagreement," she said. Her voice was too steady. It was the steadiness of someone walking a tightrope over a canyon of broken glass. It was nothing, just stress. Daniel's work, you know. The firm is pushing him so hard. The firm. Always the firm, or the traffic, or the weather. Daniel's anger was a nomadic thing, always looking for a place to land, and Emma had spent 3 years turning herself into a soft landing spot. He grabbed my wrist, Mom. Hard. But it was an accident. He was just trying to get me to listen. He didn't mean it. My heart didn't race. It slowed. A deep, cold deceleration. I felt the phantom grip on my own arm. Why is it that we feel our children's bruises before they even form on their skin? Is this the curse of the mother? To be an emotional lightning rod for a body that is no longer hers? I just wanted to hear your voice," she whispered. "I'm here," I repeated. My voice was a stone. "I am right here. I am not going anywhere." We talked for 20 minutes about nothing. We talked about the hydrangeas I'm trying to revive. We talked about a recipe for lemon tart. We built a bridge of domestic trivialities over the dark water of her marriage. "I have to go," she said finally. "He's home. I love you. I love you, Emma." I heard the click. Or I thought I did. I pulled the phone away from my ear to lay it on the workbench, but the screen stayed glowing. The timer was still ticking. 22:14. 22:15. She hadn't hit end. I should have hung up. A respectful mother, a woman who understands boundaries, would have tapped the red circle and returned to her cedarwood. But I am not that woman. I am the intense one. I am the one who smells smoke long before the fire is visible. I pressed the phone back to my ear. My breath hitched. Silence. Then, the heavy rhythmic thud of a door closing. Not a slam, Daniel was too controlled for slams, but a solid, final sound. The sound of a vault locking. "Who was that?" Daniel's voice. It was smooth, like expensive bourbon, but with that underlying burn. "Just my mom," Emma said. Her voice had changed. It was smaller now. It was a voice that apologized for taking up oxygen. "You always run to your mother, don't you?" I heard footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. I could see him in my mind. His tailored shirt. The way he never had a hair out of place. The way he looked at Emma as if she were a piece of property that kept depreciating in value. "I was just talking to her, Daniel. It's fine. Do you want me to show you what happens when you embarrass me like that? When you cry to her like a child?" A muffled sound. A gasp? A coat hitting the floor? "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "I'm sorry. Please." "You're so dramatic, Emma. You're pathetic. Look at you." Then, the true silence. The call disconnected. I stood in my craft room, the smell of cedar suddenly sickening, like a funeral pyre. My hands were shaking so violently I had to grip the edge of the workbench. Is this what we fear most? Not that our children will be unhappy, but that they will be erased? That the vibrant, laughing girl who used to catch rain on her tongue has been replaced by this hollowed-out thing, apologizing to a monster in a silk tie? I looked down at my phone. The call log was there. A 23-minute bridge to a nightmare. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt a cold, crystalline clarity settle over me. For years I had been the too much mother. I had been the one who saw the red flags and was told I was imagining things. He's a good provider, Nora. He's so handsome, Nora. You're just projecting your own failed marriage, Nora. I opened the voice memo app on my tablet. I played the call log back and recorded the audio. Then I emailed it to myself. Then I uploaded it to a cloud drive he would never find. I sat there in the dark as the Seattle rain turned to a steady pour. I thought about the words coercive control. I thought about the way a person can be dismantled piece by piece until there is nothing left but a shell. How many women are lying in bed right now, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the small things are enough to justify leaving? Does it have to be a broken rib, or is a broken spirit enough? I realized then that I wasn't just holding a recording. I was holding the keys to my daughter's prison. But if I moved too fast, I would blow the whole thing up with her inside. The following week was a masterclass in performance. I invited them to brunch. I bought mimosas. I made a quiche. I wore a sweater the color of oatmeal and smiled until my cheeks ached. I watched Daniel. He was perfect. He helped me clear the plates. He complimented my garden. He put his hand on the small of Emma's back, a gesture that looked like affection to anyone else, but to me, it looked like a shepherd's crook, guiding her, restraining her. "Emma looks a little tired, doesn't she, Nora?" Daniel said, sipping his coffee. "I tell her she needs to stop obsessing over her weight and just sleep more, but she's so high-strung." He laughed, a warm, melodic sound. Emma looked down at her plate. She had barely touched the quiche. "I'm fine, Daniel." "She's just sensitive," he added, looking at me with a conspiratorial wink. "Like her mother." The insult was wrapped in a compliment, a poison pill covered in sugar. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I looked at Emma's wrist. She was wearing a thick gold watch, Daniel's gift. It covered the place where he had grabbed her. Does she know I heard? I wondered. Does she suspect that the silence she lives in has been breached? I spent my nights in a fever of research. I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading about the honeymoon phase and intermittent reinforcement. I learned about the way abusers use the victim's own family against them. I found a lawyer named Sarah who didn't blink when I told her I had a recording. "It's a start," Sarah said, her voice steady over the phone. "But Emma has to be the one to choose. You can't save someone who isn't ready to stand up. If you show her this too soon, she might run back to him and tell him everything. Then you lose her forever." That was the fear that kept me awake, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. The fear of the no. The fear that she would choose the devil she knew over the mother who was too much. "What is it about us?" I asked the darkness. "Why do we stay in rooms where the air is thinning? Why do we think we can love a hollow man until he's full?" I waited. I bided my time like a predator, though I felt more like a ghost. I watched Emma's light fade. I watched her stop wearing bright colors. I watched her stop calling me. She was disappearing. 3 weeks later, a Sunday. Emma came over alone. Daniel was at a golf tournament. She looked like a ghost of herself. Pale, her eyes rimmed with red, her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. We sat in the sunroom. The light was beautiful and cruel, showing every line of exhaustion on her face. "I can't do anything right, Mom," she said. Her voice was a flat, dead thing. "I forgot to pick up his dry cleaning, and he didn't even yell. He just looked at me with such disgust, like I was a bug he wanted to squash." She started to cry, not a loud, dramatic sob, but a silent leaking of spirit. "I think I'm losing my mind," she whispered. "He says I remember things wrong. He says he never said the things I know he said. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I am dramatic." This was it. The moment where the floor meets the feet. "Emma," I said. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I need you to listen to something. And I want you to know that I love you. More than my own life." I pulled out my tablet. I didn't explain. I didn't preface. I just hit play. The room was silent, save for the digital ghosts of 3 weeks ago. "You always run to your mother, don't you? Do you want me to show you what happens when you embarrass me like that?" Emma froze. I watched her face. It was a terrifying thing to witness. The moment a person's denial is stripped away. It wasn't relief. It was horror. It was the sound of a world cracking open. She heard the muffled sound. She heard her own pathetic, "I'm sorry." She heard the man she loved call her pathetic. When the recording ended, the silence in the sunroom was heavy enough to crush us both. Emma didn't move. She didn't breathe. "You recorded us?" she whispered. Her eyes were wide, darting. You were listening." "The call didn't end, Emma. I didn't seek it out, but I kept it." "You should have deleted it," she said, her voice rising. "You had no right. This is my life. You're always doing this, always pushing, always being too much." She stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. For a second, I thought she would run. I thought I had lost her. "I heard him, Emma," I said, staying seated. My voice was a low, steady anchor. "I heard the man you've been protecting. I heard the way he speaks to the girl I raised to be a queen. And I realized he doesn't love you. He loves the way you break." She stopped. Her shoulders slumped. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a devastating, hollow grief. She sank back into the chair and buried her face in her hands. "I thought I was making it up," she sobbed. "I thought I was just bad at being a wife." "No," I said, moving to her, kneeling on the floor at her feet. "You were just under the wrong narrator, Emma. He's been writing your story for 3 years. It's time you took the pen back." We didn't call the police that day. We didn't have a cinematic confrontation. Instead, we became architects of a shadow life. Over the next month, Emma brought me donations for the thrift store. Bags that actually contained her birth certificate, her grandmother's jewelry, her favorite books. We rented a small storage unit in my name. I watched her go back to him every night. That was the hardest part, watching my daughter walk back into the lion's den, knowing I had to let her. "Is this how it feels?" she asked me one night, standing by my car. "To be a spy in your own life?" "It's how it feels to be a survivor," I told her. Then came the Tuesday he was in Portland for a conference. We moved fast. We didn't take the furniture. We didn't take the nice things he had bought to decorate his cage. We took her life, her clothes, her laptop, her soul. When Daniel returned to an empty house, he did exactly what I expected. He called, he texted, he pleaded. Then, he threatened. "You're nothing without me, Emma. You're a failure. Your mother has poisoned your mind. If you don't come home right now, I'll make sure everyone knows how unstable you are." Emma sat on the floor of her new, tiny apartment. It smelled of stale paint and hope. She held her phone, watching the texts scroll by. "He's going to tell everyone I'm crazy," she said. "Let him," I said. "And then we'll show them the recording." She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw my daughter. Not the wife, not the victim, not the shadow. I saw the girl who used to climb trees and refused to come down. "You were always too much, Mom," she said, a small, watery smile breaking through. "I used to be so embarrassed by it." "I know," I said. "Thank God," she whispered. "Thank God you never learned how to be less." Emma leaned her head against the bare wall of her new home. The silence here wasn't heavy or threatening. It was empty. And in that emptiness, there was finally room for her to breathe. I left her there, surrounded by mismatched boxes and the terrifying, beautiful freedom of a blank page. As I drove home through the Seattle mist, I realized my joints didn't ache as much. The intensity hadn't been a flaw. It had been the lighthouse. And the light was finally home. The champagne was cold, expensive, and tasted like metal in the back of my throat. It was a June afternoon in the Skagit Valley, the kind of day that looks like a postcard from a life you're supposed to want. The tulips had long since bowed their heads, but the peonies were in a state of aggressive, pillowy bloom, scenting the air with a sweetness so thick it felt like it could choke you. I stood on the periphery of the white marquee tent, my hands gripping a crystal flute until my knuckles turned the color of the linens. I was looking for my daughter, not the bride. The bride was everywhere, a blur of ivory silk and forced radiance. But Emma, the girl who used to hide in the pantry to read poetry by flashlight. "She's breathtaking, Nora," a voice chirped at my elbow. It was one of the many women whose names I had forgotten, a friend of Daniel's mother. "You must be so proud. He's such a catch. A partner at the firm by 32? And those eyes." "He's very symmetrical," I said. The word felt like a small, sharp pebble in my mouth. The woman laughed, patting my arm. "Oh, Nora, always so intense. It's just a wedding, dear. Try to be a guest at your own daughter's life for once." I watched them then, the happy couple. They were standing near the cake, a 5-tiered architectural marvel that looked too stable to actually eat. Daniel had his arm around Emma's waist. To the 300 guests, it was the embrace of a protective husband. To me, it looked like a structural check. His hand wasn't resting on her. It was anchoring her. His thumb was making a repetitive, rhythmic movement against her ribs, a small, controlling pulse. I moved closer, weaving through the scent of expensive cologne and sweat. "Really think you should have gone with the salmon for everyone, Em," I heard Daniel say as I approached. His voice was a low, melodic murmur, the kind of tone that sounds like a secret shared between lovers. "The steak is a bit heavy for a summer afternoon. People are sluggish. Look at your bridesmaids." Emma's smile didn't falter, but it changed. It went from a light to a reflection. "I know, Dan. I just thought you liked the filet at the tasting." "I liked it for us," he said, tucking a loose strand of her hair behind her ear with a precision that felt clinical. "But a hostess thinks of the room. It's okay. I'll handle the thank you notes for your side of the family. You're clearly overwhelmed." I'm not overwhelmed, she whispered. Honey, he said, his smile widening as he noticed me standing there. Your mother is watching. Don't make a scene. He turned to me, his eyes as clear and vacuous as a summer sky. Nora, isn't she beautiful? I've told her 3 times she's the most stunning woman in Washington, but she's so modest. She needs me to remind her who she is. She knows who she is, I wanted to scream. She is a woman who loves storms and messy charcoal drawings and eating cold pizza at 2 a.m. She is not a hostess. She is not a reflection. She's always had a very strong sense of self, Daniel, I said, my voice vibrating with that intensity everyone told me to dampen. I don't think she's forgotten. Daniel's grip on her waist tightened, just a fraction. I saw Emma's breath hitch. Well, Daniel said, his tone perfectly pleasant. Marriage has a way of refining a person, shaving off the rough edges, don't you think? Like a good piece of timber. I looked at my daughter. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was staring at the boutonniere on his lapel, a white anemone with a dark, bruised-looking center. Why do we mistake being shaped for being loved? I wondered. When did we decide that a man's interest in our every thought was a compliment rather than a perimeter check? Later, during the toasts, the best man told a story about how Daniel once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm just to bring Emma a specific type of tea when she had the flu. The room erupted in awes. The women sighed. I looked at the table. Emma was drinking water. Daniel was watching her drink the water. When she set the glass down, he moved it 2 inches to the left, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the charger plate. It was a small thing, a nothing thing. But as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long, distorted shadows across the lawn, I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the evening air. I realized that Daniel didn't love Emma because of her spirit. He loved her because she was a beautiful, high-quality material he could carve. I found her in the ladies' lounge an hour later, touching up her lipstick. The room was quiet, smelling of hairspray and lilies. Em, I said, stepping inside. She jumped, her lipstick smearing slightly at the corner of her mouth. Mom, you scared me. Sorry. I walked over to the vanity. I wanted to grab her shoulders. I wanted to tell her we could get in my Volvo right now and just drive until the gas ran out. Are you happy? Really? Emma laughed, but the sound didn't reach her eyes. She grabbed a tissue and wiped the smear. Of course I am, Mom. It's my wedding day. Stop being so, too much? A little, she said softly. She looked at herself in the mirror, then at me. For a split second, the mask slipped. I saw the girl from the pantry. He wants everything to be perfect. He has a vision for us. Is that so bad? To be part of someone's vision? Only if you're a character in it, I said, and not the co-author. The door swung open. Daniel stood there, his frame filling the doorway. He didn't come in. It was the ladies' lounge, after all. But he leaned against the frame, his presence an immediate vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. There you are, he said. He didn't look at me. He looked only at Emma. The photographer is looking for us, Em. Golden hour is fading. We're losing the light. We're losing the light. He held out his hand. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Emma turned away from me, smoothed her silk skirt, and walked toward him. As she passed, he didn't take her hand. He took her elbow, steering her into the hallway. I stayed in the lounge, staring at the smeared tissue she'd left on the marble counter. It was stained with a color called Forever Rose. I felt a sudden, sharp pang in my chest, a premonition that felt like a physical weight. I knew then that I wouldn't be invited into their home often. I knew that my intensity would be the first thing he taught her to fear. I picked up the tissue and threw it away. My hands were steady now, but my heart was a riot. I had spent 24 years teaching my daughter how to speak. I realized, with a soul-crushing certainty, that I was about to spend the next several years watching her learn how to be silent. The first night of her freedom sounded like a ticking clock in an empty cathedral. We had tucked Emma into a studio apartment in a brick building on the edge of Capitol Hill, a place that smelled of old radiator steam and other people's memories. It was the antithesis of the glass and steel mausoleum she had shared with Daniel. There were no smart home hubs here, no sensors that tracked when the front door opened, no integrated lighting systems that Daniel could dim from his phone to signal his displeasure. I stayed with her that first night. We didn't sleep. We sat on the floor. The only furniture was a twin mattress and a pile of boxes, and watched the shadows of the street lamps crawl across the ceiling. "He's going to call," Emma whispered. She was wrapped in a moth-eaten quilt I'd kept since her college days. She was trembling, a fine, rhythmic vibration that seemed to come from her bones. "The phone is off, Em. The SIM card is in the trash at the gas station 3 miles back. He'll find a way. He always finds a way. He's like water, Mom. He finds the smallest crack and just seeps in." I looked at her, my heart a bruised and heavy thing. Is this what we do to our daughters? We tell them to be kind, to be empathetic, to look for the why behind a man's pain, and in doing so, we hand them the shovel to dig their own graves. "Let him seep," I said, my voice like iron. "He'll find that we've plugged the cracks with concrete." But the silence was the loudest thing in the room. In the absence of Daniel's constant, low-frequency critique, Emma seemed to be suffering from a kind of psychological bends. She didn't know how to move without checking a phantom mirror. She asked me for permission to use the bathroom. She asked me if it was okay that she was hungry at midnight. "Emma," I said, catching her hands. They were ice cold. "You don't have to ask. You are the only person in this room who gets to decide what you do." She looked at me, her eyes wide and glassy. "I don't know if I like what I decide yet. I don't know if I remember how to have a want that isn't just a reaction to him. How long does it take for a soul to grow its skin back?" I wondered. "And what happens if the skin grows back wrong?" By Thursday, the silence broke. Daniel didn't have her new number, but he had my email. He had her LinkedIn. He had the power of a man who believed the world was a series of problems to be solved with the right amount of pressure. I opened my laptop at 6 a.m. to find 17 emails. They were a masterclass in the cycle of abuse, a roller coaster of manipulation that made my stomach turn. 4:02 a.m. "Nora, I'm worried. Emma isn't responding. I know you're angry with me, but please, for her sake, tell me she's safe. The concerned protector." 4:45 a.m. I realized I was wrong about the dry cleaning. I was stressed. "I'm starting therapy on Monday. Please tell her I'm doing the work." The false penitent. 5:30 a.m. "If you are holding her against her will, I will involve the authorities. You've always been unstable, Nora. Everyone knows it. Don't make me do something we'll both regret." The threatening judge. I sat in my kitchen, the gray Seattle light bleeding through the blinds, and I felt a flicker of the old fear. The too much label he had pinned on me for years, the unstable mother-in-law, it was a potent weapon. If he could convince the world I was the kidnapper and she was the victim of my mania, he could win. I didn't reply. I followed the instructions the lawyer, Sarah, had given me. Collect. Categorize. Do not engage. I created a folder on my desktop. I labeled it The Narrative. Inside, I placed the recording from the kitchen. I placed screenshots of his emails. I added the photo I'd taken of the bruise on Emma's wrist 3 weeks ago, the one she thought I hadn't seen when she reached for a wine glass. Then, the doorbell rang. My heart stopped. My house was supposed to be a fortress, but Daniel knew the gate code. He knew which floorboard creaked. I looked at the security camera feed on my phone. He was standing on my porch, wearing a charcoal wool coat. He looked like he was heading to a board meeting. He looked like the kind of man who pays his taxes and rescues kittens. He looked like safety. "Nora," he called out, his voice calm, projecting just enough to reach the neighbor's ears. "Nora, I know you're in there. I just want to talk. I'm worried about Emma's mental state. She's been so fragile lately. I think she's having a breakdown." I walked to the door, but I didn't open it. I spoke through the wood. "She's not here, Daniel. Nora, please. Open the door. We're family. We can fix this. I know you think I'm the villain, but I love her. I've spent every day of the last 3 years trying to keep her together." "You spent 3 years taking her apart," I said. "Go home, Daniel, or I call the police." "On what grounds?" He laughed, a soft, chilling sound. "A husband looking for his wife who left without a word? The police will help me find her. Is that what you want?" I felt the trap closing. He was right. On paper, he was the concerned spouse. On paper, I was the meddling, intense mother with a history of being difficult. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the audio file. I turned the volume to maximum. I pressed the phone against the door. I hit play. "Do you want me to show you what happens when you embarrass me like that? You're so dramatic, Emma. You're pathetic. Look at you." The voice, his voice, echoed off the porch and into the quiet morning air. Silence followed. A long, agonizing silence. I looked at the monitor. Daniel wasn't moving. The mask of the concerned husband didn't slip. It shattered. His face went flat, the eyes turning into cold, dark stones. He looked at the door as if he could see through the wood to the throat he wanted to squeeze. "You think that's enough?" he whispered, leaning closer to the door. "One recording? My word against a disturbed mother? I'll ruin you, Nora. I'll make sure she never speaks to you again." "I'm not the one you have to worry about," I said, my voice finally finding its center. "I've already sent this to your firm's HR department. I've sent it to your mother, and I've sent it to Sarah Jenkins." I was lying about the HR department. Not yet. But I needed him to feel the walls closing in. I needed him to know that his symmetrical life was about to become very, very messy. He stood there for another minute, a statue of pure, distilled malice. Then, without a word, he turned and walked down the steps. He didn't look back. I slumped against the door, my legs giving out. I was shaking, but for the first time in years, it wasn't the shaking of a victim. It was the shaking of a woman who had just fired the first shot in a war she intended to win. I drove to Emma's apartment an hour later. She was sitting by the window, watching a pigeon on the fire escape. She looked smaller, but there was a new sharpness to her profile. The silk cocoon was gone. She was wearing a stained sweatshirt and leggings. "He came by," I said. She didn't flinch. "I know. He emailed me through my old university account. He told me you were holding me captive. He told me he'd forgive me if I came home by tonight." She turned to look at me. "Mom, do you think I'll ever not be afraid of him?" I sat down next to her on the floor. The fear doesn't go away, Em. It just changes shape. It goes from being a monster under the bed to a shadow in the corner. You learn how to live with the shadow. You learn that the shadow can't actually hurt you unless you let it back into the bed. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I had a dream last night that I was back at the wedding, but instead of saying, "I do," I just turned around and walked into the woods. I felt so light. I felt like I was made of air. You are made of more than air, Emma. You're made of the same stuff as the stars and the same stuff as the dirt. You're durable. We sat there in the quiet. I thought about all the women who don't have a recording. The women who are told they are too much until they believe they are nothing at all. What is the cost of a truth? I asked myself. And are we ever truly prepared to pay it? I want to see the lawyer tomorrow, Emma said. Her voice was steady. I want to start the filing. And Mom? Yes, baby? I want to listen to the recording again, just once. I want to hear the part where I say, "I'm sorry." I want to hear it so I never, ever say it to him again. I handed her the phone. As the recording played, I watched her face. The horror was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. She wasn't a girl in a pantry anymore. She was a woman realizing that her mother's intensity wasn't a burden. It was a weapon. The first week of normal was not a liberation. It was a sensory minefield. Freedom, I realized as I watched Emma, is often more terrifying than captivity. In captivity, the rules are clear. You move within the cage, you learn the length of the chain, you anticipate the strike. But in the open air, every sound is a potential threat, and every silence is a trap waiting to be sprung. We were in a grocery store, a mundane, brightly lit sanctuary of suburban life. I was trying to get her to pick out a box of cereal, a simple choice, a $5 decision. "Do you want the granola or the flakes, Em?" I asked, my voice light, trying to anchor us in the domestic. Emma stood frozen in the center of the aisle. Her hand was hovered halfway between the boxes, suspended in the air like a broken wing. She wasn't looking at the cereal. She was staring at a man 3 aisles over. He was wearing a navy blue blazer. He had his back to us, but he was standing with a certain rigid posture, a slight tilt of the head as he examined a jar of olives. "Emma?" She didn't hear me. Her breath was coming in shallow, jagged hitches. The color had drained from her face, leaving her skin the gray of wet ash. "He likes the organic ones," she whispered, her voice a ghost. "He says the generic brands are for people who don't respect their bodies. If I buy the wrong one, he'll look at the receipt. He always looks at the receipts, Mom. He highlights the things I shouldn't have bought." "He isn't here, Emma. That's just a man buying olives." "He's everywhere," she said, her eyes darting. "He's in the way the light hits the floor. He's in the way the air feels cold. I can feel him watching me decide. I can hear him saying, 'Really, Emma? You're going to eat that?'" I dropped the cereal boxes into the cart and took her by the shoulders. I felt the tremors through her thin sweatshirt. This was the psychological fallout, the echo of the abuse. Daniel didn't need to be in the room to control her. He had installed a version of himself inside her mind, a miniature tyrant that sat on her shoulder and narrated her every failure. "Look at me," I commanded. "Look at my eyes. I am Nora. I am too much. I am loud, and I am here. Daniel is in a glass office 20 miles away, probably pretending to be a human being. He is not in this grocery store." She blinked, the fog of the flashback clearing just enough for her to see me. She slumped against my chest, right there in the breakfast aisle, smelling of laundry detergent and panic. How do you unlearn a person? I wondered. How do you scrub the stain of a man out of the fabric of your soul? While Emma fought the ghosts in her head, I fought the man in the world. I met Sarah Jenkins in her office on Friday. The room was lined with thick, leather-bound books that looked like they held the weight of 1,000 broken promises. Sarah was a woman of sharp angles and even sharper intellect. She didn't offer me tea. She offered me a strategy. Daniel has filed a wellness check request with the local precinct, Sarah said, tapping a pen against a folder. He's claiming Emma is under the influence of an unstable family member. That would be you, Nora, and that she's having a manic episode. He's trying to establish a narrative of mental incompetence so he can file for a temporary guardianship. I felt a cold shiver of rage. He's trying to legally kidnap her. He's trying to use the system as an extension of his own hands, Sarah corrected. But he's made a mistake. He thinks we're playing defense. We're not. She pulled out a copy of the recording I had sent her. I've had this transcribed and authenticated by an audio forensics expert. We are filing for a domestic violence protection order, DVPO, this afternoon. We're also filing for a temporary restraining order that includes no contact via third parties. And, she paused, a predatory glint in her eyes, we're filing a civil suit for intentional infliction of emotional distress. Will it work? I asked. In court? Maybe. But that's not the primary goal. The goal is to create a paper trail that contradicts his perfect husband image. Men like Daniel are terrified of the light. They thrive in the shadows of he said, she said. When you bring in transcripts, forensics, and lawyers, the shadow shrinks. I thought about the man on my porch, the way his face had turned to stone when I played the recording. He wasn't a monster. He was a coward with a good tailor. What do we do about the unstable mother accusation? I asked. Sarah looked at me over her glasses. You stay intense, Nora. You stay loud. You stay visible. If he calls you crazy, you show them you're just a mother who refused to let her daughter disappear. The world is finally starting to learn the difference. The plan was a slow, agonizingly precise dismantling. We didn't just leave. We unspooled him. Emma, under Sarah's guidance, wrote a single formal letter. No emotion, no I'm sorry. No explanations that he could twist into an argument. Daniel, I am safe. I am with legal counsel. All further communication will go through Sarah Jenkins. Do not attempt to contact me, my mother, or my employer. I have authorized the release of the audio recording from October 14th to the appropriate parties should you violate this request. Goodbye. We sent it via a process server. That night, Emma and I sat in her small apartment. We had bought a real table, a heavy, rustic thing made of reclaimed wood. It didn't match the vision Daniel would have had. It was scarred, uneven, and beautiful. The phone, the new one, with the unlisted number, sat on the table between us. He's reading it now, Emma said. She was eating a bowl of the wrong cereal. She was eating it slowly, tasting every flake. Let him read it, I said. Let him realize that the narrator has changed. I used to think I was weak for staying, she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. I thought I was a coward because I couldn't stop the disagreements. But sitting here, I realize how much strength it took just to survive him every day. I wasn't weak. I was just tired. You were a warrior in a war you didn't ask for, I said. We stayed up late, talking not about Daniel, but about the future. Emma talked about going back to school for her master's. She talked about painting again. Not the neat, controlled landscapes Daniel liked, but the messy, abstract charcoal drawings she used to make. As I drove home that night, the Seattle rain had finally stopped. The moon was out, a sharp sliver of silver against the black velvet of the sky. I thought about the voice message, the one she didn't delete, the one I didn't delete. It was a scar, yes, but a scar is just a place where the skin grew back stronger. I pulled into my driveway and looked at my dark house. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for a tragedy. The tragedy had already happened, and we had walked through the fire to the other side. I am 56 years old. I am too intense. I am too emotional. I am too much. And thank God for that. Because just enough would never have been enough to save my daughter. 6 months is long enough for the seasons to turn, but in the geography of the soul, it is barely a heartbeat. It is, however, long enough for the bruises on the psyche to fade from a violent purple to a faint, lingering yellow, the kind of color you only see if the light hits it just right. It was December in Seattle. The air was a crisp, biting cold that smelled of wood smoke and the sea. I was standing in a small, rented gallery space in Ballard, my coat still buttoned against the draft. The walls were white, stark, and populated by ghosts. Emma's ghosts. She had called the exhibition The Architecture of Silence. They weren't landscapes. They were massive, charcoal abstracts, violent sweeps of black against white, layered with translucent wax. Some looked like cages. Others looked like the moment a bird's wing catches the wind. They were too much. They were intense. They were magnificent. "She's really doing it, Nora," a voice said. I turned to see Sarah Jenkins. She wasn't in a suit today. She wore a soft cashmere wrap and held a glass of sparkling water. "The final decree came through this morning," Sarah whispered, her eyes on a particularly dark piece titled 2214. The judge didn't just grant the divorce. He took a look at the history of the protective order and Daniel's extracurricular emails during the proceedings. The settlement is substantial. Daniel's firm suggested he take a sabbatical after the audio was leaked to the local bar association. He's moved to Arizona. Apparently, he's starting over. "Starting over," I repeated. The words felt hollow. Men like Daniel don't start over. They just find new soil to deplete. But he was out of our garden. That was the victory. "He tried to sue for defamation one last time," Sarah added, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. "I told his lawyer that if they wanted to go to discovery, we would invite the press to hear the full 20-minute recording. They dropped the filing within the hour." I looked across the room. Emma was talking to a young woman who looked like she'd been crying. Emma wasn't wearing a gold watch anymore. Her wrists were bare, decorated only by a thin silver bangle that clinked as she moved her hands, which she did often now. She was taking up space. She was breathing the air in the center of the room, not the scraps at the edges. She saw me and signaled with a tilt of her head. I walked over, my boots echoing on the hardwood. "Mom," she said, pulling me into a hug. She smelled like charcoal dust and expensive espresso. She felt solid. "Did Sarah tell you?" "She did. It's over, Em. Really over." Emma stepped back, her eyes scanning the room she had built out of her own wreckage. I thought I would feel a big explosion of joy. But it's just quiet. A good kind of quiet. Like the house is finally empty and I can start decorating. She looked at the piece titled 2214. It was the exact duration of the phone call that had saved her life. In the center of the canvas, she had etched a single tiny line of gold leaf. It looked like a crack in a dam. "I still have the dreams sometimes," she admitted, her voice dropping so only I could hear. "I still check the locks twice. I still apologize to the barista if my order is too complicated." "We're all works in progress, baby," I said. "I know. But now, when I hear that voice in my head telling me I'm dramatic or pathetic, I don't believe it anymore. I just think, oh, that's just Daniel. He was always a bad narrator." She laughed, and it was the sound of a bell ringing in a clear sky. I walked out of the gallery an hour later, leaving Emma to her admirers and her new life. The city was glowing with holiday lights, the rain-slicked pavement reflecting the neon greens and reds like a blurred painting. I sat in my car for a long time, just watching the people go by. I thought about the thousands of conversations happening right now over phone lines. The sighs, the stammers, the silences. I thought about the mothers who are told they are too much and the daughters who are trying to become less. I pulled my phone out and looked at the archived folder. I had never deleted the recording, not because I wanted to relive the pain, but because it was a map. It was the proof of where we had been and the price of the ticket out. "What is a mother?" I asked the steering wheel. "A mother is a witness. A mother is an alarm system. A mother is the person who keeps the original copy of your soul in a safe place until you are strong enough to come back and claim it." I started the engine and turned on the heater. I felt a strange, deep sense of peace, not the peace of a finished story, but the peace of a clean slate. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Dinner tomorrow? I'm making that lemon tart, and I'm going to use way too much zest. Just the way you like it." I smiled, my eyes stinging with a sudden, happy heat. "I'll be there," I typed back. Intensity and all. I drove home through the dark, the lights of Seattle sparkling like a promise. The road was open, the tank was full, and for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't listening for the sound of someone else's breathing. I was just listening to my own. It was enough. It was more than enough. Happiness, I discovered, is not a destination you arrive at with a suitcase and a map. It is more like the slow reclamation of a garden that has been salted by an enemy. It begins with a single green shoot in the middle of a wasteland, then another, until one day you look out the window and realize you can no longer see the gray. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of morning that felt wide and unhurried. For years, my Saturdays had been a performance of tiptoeing, waiting for the phone to ring with Emma's whispered anxieties, or bracing for a visit where I had to watch her perform the role of the perfect wife while her eyes begged me to look away. But today, the only sound in my kitchen was the gurgle of the coffee maker and the soft thud of the Sunday paper hitting the porch. I was at the counter, rolling out dough for a galette. There is a specific kind of joy in the resistance of flour and butter under a rolling pin. It is tactile, honest, and entirely within my control. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't checking the clock to see if I was too much for the schedule. I was just Nora, making breakfast. The back door opened without a knock. Only one person has that rhythm of entry. "It's just me," Emma called out. She walked into the kitchen, and for a moment, I just stared. She was wearing a bright, unapologetic yellow raincoat. Her hair was messy, caught in a haphazard clip, and she was carrying a flat box of seedlings. "I found these at the market," she said, setting the box on the table. "Snapdragons, and some mint. I thought we could put them in those ceramic pots you made last year, the ones Daniel said were too rustic for the patio." She smiled, and it wasn't the fragile, mirrored smile of the past. It was deep. It reached her eyes and stayed there. Rustic is exactly what this house needs, I said, wiping my floury hands on my apron. In fact, I think we should go for wild. We spent the afternoon in the dirt. There is something profoundly healing about putting your hands into the earth. It reminds you that life is persistent, that things want to grow if you just stop stifling them. We sat on the back porch, the sun finally warm enough to feel through our sweaters. I went on a date last night, Emma said suddenly. She was pressing soil around the base of a snapdragon, her movements sure and steady. I froze, a trowel full of mulch suspended in midair. I didn't want to be the intense mother. I didn't want to pounce. Oh? How was it? It was quiet, she said, a small laugh escaping her. He took me to this little hole-in-the-wall Thai place. I ordered the extra spicy noodles, and Mom, I didn't even think about whether he'd think I was being messy or too bold. I just ate them. I got sauce on my chin, and I just wiped it off. She looked up at me, her face glowing in the afternoon light. He asked me what I wanted to do for a living, and I didn't give the we answer. I didn't say, well, Daniel and I think. I just said, I'm an artist. I work in charcoal and wax, and I'm looking for a bigger studio. And what did he say? He asked if he could see my work, and I told him no. Not yet. She tucked a stray hair behind her ear. It felt so good to say no, Mom. Not because I was scared, but because I have a door now, and I'm the only one with the key. I get to decide who comes in. I felt a lump in my throat that had nothing to do with sadness. It was the relief of seeing a person fully inhabited. Emma wasn't a project anymore. She wasn't a rescue mission. She was a woman who knew the value of her own no. You've grown some formidable thorns, Emma, I whispered. I'm so proud of them. They aren't thorns, she corrected softly. They're just boundaries. It turns out, when you have them, you don't actually need to be as sharp. That evening, we didn't talk about the past. We didn't mention the recording, or the lawyers, or the cold, calculated man who had tried to turn us into ghosts. Instead, we sat in the living room, with the windows cracked open to let in the scent of the new mint. Emma had brought over a record, an old, scratchy blues album she'd found at a vintage shop. Daniel hated the cracks in vinyl, she said, dropping the needle. He said it was imperfect audio. He wanted everything digitally remastered, sanitized. The music filled the room, raw, soulful, and beautifully flawed. Emma started to dance. It wasn't a graceful, practiced thing. It was a swaying, rhythmic movement of a woman who finally felt safe in her own skin. She looked at me and reached out a hand. Come on, Nora. You're too much, remember? Prove it. I laughed and took her hand. We danced in the middle of my living room, two women who had been told their whole lives to be quieter, smaller, neater. We were none of those things. We were loud, we were messy, and we were vibrantly, undeniably alive. I realized then that the happy ending isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of self. It's the ability to hear a song and know that you are the one choosing to listen. The voice message was still in the archive of my phone, but it was no longer a weapon. It was just a piece of history, like an old fossil. It had no power over the air in this room. As the sun set, painting the Seattle sky in shades of bruised orange and electric violet, I looked at my daughter. She was laughing, her head thrown back, the light of the lamp catching the silver bangle on her wrist. The architecture of silence had been torn down. In its place, we were building something else. Something loud. Something bright. Something that was finally ours. The gallery was no longer a rented space on the edge of town. This was the Vance & Co. Fine Arts downtown, a place of soaring ceilings, white marble floors, and the kind of lighting that makes everything feel like it's being viewed through a halo. It was Emma's first true solo show, not a survival piece, not a cry for help, but a declaration. I stood by the wine station, wearing a dress the color of deep plums, watching the crowd. These were the critics, the collectors, the people who usually looked for symmetry and balance. But tonight, they were standing in front of Emma's massive canvases, and they were quiet. Not the suffocating silence of Daniel's house, but the hushed, reverent silence of people witnessing something honest. "She's the talk of the season," a man in a velvet blazer murmured to his companion. "There's a raw power here. It's almost uncomfortable, but you can't look away." I smiled into my glass. Uncomfortable. That was the highest compliment for a woman who had been trained to be invisible. Emma was in the center of the room. She was wearing a sleek, forest green jumpsuit. Her shoulders were back, her chin was up, and she wasn't looking around for permission to speak. She was laughing with a woman from the Seattle Times, her hands gesturing wildly to describe the process of melting wax into charcoal. She looked radiant. Not the fragile radiance of a porcelain doll, but the glow of a furnace. I saw him before she did. Daniel was standing by the glass doors. He wasn't invited, of course. He shouldn't have been there. He looked different. His hair was a little longer, his tan a little deeper from the Arizona sun. But the eyes were the same. Those cold, calculating eyes that measured everyone's worth by how much they could serve him. My blood turned to ice. My first instinct was the old one, to run to her, to shield her, to be the too much mother who causes a scene to save her child. But I stopped. I forced myself to stay still. I watched Emma. She had noticed the shift in the room. She turned her head slowly, her gaze landing on him. The air seemed to go still. The woman from the Times stopped talking. A few people who knew the history whispered. Daniel started to walk toward her. He had that same smooth, predatory stride. He had a small bouquet of white anemones in his hand, the same flowers from their wedding, a tactical move, a psychological hook. "Emma," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by those closest. I saw the announcement. I couldn't stay away. It's quite a change from the work you used to do. A bit chaotic, don't you think? He was doing it again. The joke that was actually an insult. The concern that was actually a cage. Emma didn't flinch. She didn't look at the flowers. She looked directly into his eyes, and she didn't see a monster. She saw a man who had become very, very small. "It's not chaotic, Daniel," she said, her voice clear and resonant, filling the gallery. "It's honest. I'm sorry it makes you uncomfortable, but then again, you were never very good with things you couldn't control." Daniel's smile faltered. The mask was slipping in front of a very influential audience. "I just thought we could talk, for old time's sake. I've missed our debates." "There are no debates anymore, Daniel," Emma said. She took a step toward him, and for the first time, he was the one who flinched. "There is only my work, and you are standing in the way of the light. Please leave." "Emma, don't be dramatic." "I am an artist, Daniel," she interrupted, a beautiful, sharp smile breaking across her face. "I am supposed to be dramatic. Now, either you leave on your own, or I have my mother come over here. And we both know how intense she can be." She looked over at me and winked. Daniel looked at her, then at me, then at the room full of people who were all staring at him with a mix of pity and distaste. He realized, finally, that he had no power here. The narrative was no longer his to write. He turned and walked out the glass doors, the white flowers left forgotten on a pedestal. After the gallery closed, after the red "Sold" stickers had been placed next to almost every piece, Emma and I sat on the back of my Volvo, looking out over the Puget Sound. We were sharing a bag of greasy fries and a bottle of cheap champagne. "You did it," I said, bumping my shoulder against hers. "No," she said, looking out at the dark water. "We did it." She leaned her head on my shoulder. The silence was perfect. It was the silence of a task completed, of a battle won, of a life reclaimed. "I realized something tonight when I saw him," she whispered. "What's that?" "I realized that I don't hate him. Hating him would mean he still has a place in my head. I just felt nothing. He's just a man who doesn't understand art. And I'm a woman who finally understands herself." I looked at my daughter, my brave, intense, wonderful daughter. She wasn't a girl in a pantry anymore. She was the sun, and she was finally in full bloom. "So," I said, raising my plastic cup, "what's the next chapter?" Emma laughed, the sound echoing over the water, bright and free. "Whatever I want it to be, Mom. Whatever I want it to be." As we sat there in the cool night air, I felt a deep, radiating warmth. The too much mother and the too much daughter. We were a storm, we were a riot, and we were exactly who we were meant to be. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the next page.